it's an honor to be here. Let me start by saying that. And as a 30-plus year resident of Oakland, I also like to extend my thanks to our Mayor, Libby Schaaf, for coming and supporting us and for really leading us. Those of us who live in Oakland really appreciate her leadership very, very much. Also, it's my opportunity to welcome you to Oakland as a 30-plus year resident and to encourage you while you're here to also see and understand that there's an outdoor Oakland as well. We have a lake with a bird sanctuary, we have estuaries, we have redwood forests and hiking and mountain biking. So there is an outdoors out there, and of course, encouraging people to get outdoors is what Children in Nature Network is all about, and what we're all here to talk about. So as I thought about that, I thought, what does it mean to encourage, particularly our young people, to go outside and to make that connection with nature? Because we know that a life lived outdoors is a life well lived, and that's what we want all of our young people to have. And that made me start to think about my own youth, and I think I can remember it. David mentioned a certain number of years. I have to go back a little further than that. But it made me think about my youth and my connection with nature. When I was young, things were obviously a lot different than they are now. We had the Vietnam War on one hand, and we had civil rights movement on the other, and somewhere in between was the space program. And when you're young, you want to see the world. And I know I certainly did. And the way I thought I would see the world was to become an astronaut and see the world from space. But as a black kid from segregated St. Louis, that was unlikely to happen. My own mother was a mathematician, and it took really until the mid-1970s for her to be able to get a job as a math professor, which was commensurate with her knowledge, skills, and experience. I mean, many of you have probably seen the movie Hidden Figures, which chronicles the 3 African-American women mathematicians working with NASA. And my mother's story was very similar to that. But I figured there's another way to see the world. And I found it by going outdoors, by joining the Boy Scouts. And I found that by going outdoors, it was invigorating, it was exciting, and it was liberating, because all of those social norms and taboos that existed in the rest of society just simply didn't exist outdoors. Outdoors is one of the most democratic places on earth. And so this gave me the impetus to both enjoy the outdoors, to protect it, and to engage and encourage other young people to have the same types of experiences that I was able to have while growing up. The picture on the right is a photo of me enjoying one of those passions I have of climbing high atop Mount Rainier with Sally Jewell, who was the former Secretary of the Interior, and with whom I share both a friendship but also this passion for getting kids outside. You'll recall that one of her signature programs during her time in office was to engage kids getting outside on our public lands through learning, working, playing, and serving. And so this notion of getting kids engaged with nature through some mechanism was something that drove me to get involved with a number of organizations. Most notably in my case was Nature Bridge, which is an organization that provides environmental science residential programs for about 35,000 kids a year in our national parks. So I served on the board of Nature Bridge for probably almost 16 years, something like that. And part of being on the board is obviously meeting other board members, including one of our founding board members, a fellow named Bill Anders. And if you're not going to become an astronaut, and I never did, the next best thing is to befriend one, and that would be Bill. You see, Bill was an Apollo 8 astronaut who, along with Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, were the first to orbit the moon in 1968. And although the name Bill Anders may or may not resonate with you, I know that the photograph that he took will, because it's been called the most iconic photo of the 20th century. Earthrise. You have to clap for a picture that's now a postage stamp, okay? Now, when Bill saw this, 2 things happened. First thing he said was, "Jim, hurry up, give me the camera, quick, color film, let's go." The second thing he said was, "Wow, look at that. Wow, look at that." Now, if you guys watch any of these movies about astronauts and all the stereotypes, They're all true. These guys have cool, calm, and collected in their DNA. Nothing phases them. But this blew their minds. Frank said that as we peered out of that little window into the depths and darkness of space, the only thing we saw with any color on it was the Earth. And at that point, we understood just how fragile our planet is and the responsibility we all have to protect it. Frank went on further to say that once we saw the Earth, we lost all interest in the moon. And if you think about it, it's pretty crazy, huh? You sit atop this rocket, you can blow yourself up, go 250,000 miles to the moon, and you go, oh, never mind. It's because they went to the moon to discover the Earth. And when this photograph came back and it went around the Earth, it created a moral imperative for all of us to care for creation, to care for the planet, and to care for us as its inhabitants. And what is that connection? Well, I think I've never heard it more elegantly described than through the esteemed biologist E.O. Wilson's concept of biophilia, which connotes this innate connection that we have as human beings with the natural world. It's in our DNA. Our health and the health of the planet are inextricably linked. And here's an example. Shinrin Ryoku, which I can barely pronounce, means forest bathing. Okay, it's a Japanese term, and all it really means, folks, is just hanging out around a bunch of trees. But it's an important enough concept that in 1982, the Japanese created a whole public health initiative around getting out and hanging out around a bunch of trees, because they found that it lowered heart rate, lowered blood pressure, stress hormones were decreased, and people had a general sense of well-being. And it looks something like this. Now these are a bunch of kids in a nature-rich program, admittedly, and it's a nature-rich program, I'm saying that. They're in the Olympic National Park, just hanging out a bunch of trees. But take a look at their faces. What you see can only be described as expressing a sense of awe. And I select that term very specifically because there is a professor here at UC Berkeley named Dr. Dagmar Keltner who studies the science of awe, which he describes as being in the presence of something greater than oneself. And he says that although it doesn't exclusively happen, it more commonly happens when you're in nature. And moreover, when you're experiencing this sense of awe, you're more likely to be kind, compassionate, empathetic. In other words, when you're in nature, experiencing awe, we are better versions of ourselves. So now we know that just being in the natural world can make us more mentally healthy, sense of well-being. We behave better. But what about our physical well-being? Well, we know that from a public health perspective, there's very little debate about the advantages of nature, the natural world, on public health. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of it's really about mitigating the negative effects of diseases of indoor living, like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. Okay. But I'd like to talk for a moment about the power of nature to actually manage disease and illness. Now, this is a study talking about how the prevalence of asthma is reduced in areas with large numbers of trees. And for those who don't know what asthma is, it's a disease where the airways or the tubes that bring the oxygen to the lungs constrict as a result of exposure to allergens or other environmental toxins. And essentially, by restricting that airflow, it's almost like suffocating while awake. It's really quite terrifying. And I know because I have asthma. Fortunately, it's controlled now, but when I was a kid, it was pretty bad. And the cycle went something like this. I'd get exposed to these environmental toxins. Remember, an urban kid living in crowded areas in St. Louis. And I would start to have an asthma attack, go to the emergency department, they'd give me a shot, I'd feel a little better, the airways would open up, and they'd send me back, where? To the same place, the same allergens, the same toxins. 3 weeks later, I would be back. And that cycle just went on and on. But there's a different story to be told. I remember when I was in 5th grade, there was a camp that I really wanted to go to. And it It was a camp that had bunk beds and sleeping bags and campfires and all this kind of cool stuff, which I was really excited about going to. But a couple of days before camp, I got sick. Went to the emergency department, only this time I didn't get a whole lot better. So my mom took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, he's clearly too sick to go. He's going to be far away, and he's going to be outside, which could make him sicker. So my mom, sensing my immense disappointment, negotiated a settlement, which was I wasn't going to go with my group, but if I felt better the next day, she could drive me, and I could catch up with them. So the next day I woke up and immediately reported that I felt better. Of course, I did not. I felt no better whatsoever, but I knew that I was going to get to go. So off we went, driving the car. My mom handed me a stack of postcards, one for each day, and I was to write a note to her about how I was feeling and mail it back to her each day. And for those who are young in the audience, these postcard things you put into an email. It's not email. It's different. So we arrived, and I got out, and immediately started running around amongst a bunch of trees, jumping in the ponds, everything else. I got dirty. I don't know that I washed anything for 3 weeks. But I had a great time, and I didn't feel better. I felt great. In fact, I felt so great, and that was the good part of the story. The bad part of the story was that I didn't write any of those postcards. And when I got home, I was in big trouble, but I felt great until I got into trouble. So the point I'd like to make, though, is as we face a healthcare system with escalating costs exponentially, with yet some of the poorest outcomes in the developed world, would we be better off investing in emergency rooms, shots, inhalers, or just planting a bunch of trees? I think you know where my vote is. Finally, I'd just like to close with the notion that, we like our children to be of sound mind and sound body, but we also want them to grow and to learn. And this is simply a collage of kids learning in nature's classroom. And thanks to the great work of the Children in Nature Network, there's a lot of research now that supports the notions that we all know to be true, but now have been proven to be true through scientifically based research. That kids who learn in the outdoors not only benefit from being in the outdoors, we've already talked about all of those benefits, but they also have better academic performance. They tend to be more focused, fewer behavioral problems. There's gender-neutral participation in science-based activities. All of those benefits accrue to kids simply by spending the time learning outdoors. And as I'm thinking about things like school budgets and capital budgets, I don't think it takes a lot of brick and mortar to build these classrooms. They're there. There's also a lot of work that's happening now showing or looking at what we also know to be true, which is the power of nature to build character. There's work that's supported by the Bechtel Foundation on character, or what some would call social emotional learning, and I know that there are some attendees here who are participating in that group of or national organizations, probably too many for me to list, but I think Outward Bound is here, and Student Conservation Association, Nature Bridge, there's Boys and Girls Club, Y, the Scouts, and really looking at how being in nature, and particularly how being educated, having experiences in nature, helps build character, helps make us better citizens, which is something that we would want for all of our kids. So, in closing, I guess what I would say is this concept of connecting kids with nature, of getting them outside, is what we need to do to care for creation. It's how we're going to make the world a better place through our children. And if you ever doubt that we can do this, I would remind you of the words of Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you.